Good afternoon. The Cuyahoga County Finance and Budgeting Committee meeting for Monday, September 19, 2022 will please come to order, and I would ask for the clerk to please call the roll.
And just as a reminder to all who are in attendance, this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the county's YouTube page. Calling the roll, Mr. Miller,
Here.
Mr. Tuma,
Here.
Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is absent at the moment. Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
Mr. Schrein. Mr. Schrein is absent at the moment. Ms. Baker.
Here.
Ms. Turner. Ms. Turner is absent at the moment. There is a quorum.
And Ms. Turner just went out for a moment to her car, and she'll be back momentarily. Do we have anybody who has signed in for public comment?
No, Mr. Chair, no one has signed in.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the July 25th, 2022 meeting. Do we have a motion relative to those minutes? Is there a second? It's been moved by Councilman Tuma and seconded by Baker to approve the minutes as presented for July 25th, 2022. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. Ayes have it, and the minutes are approved as presented. I would just like to make a comment regarding the the Harris property tax system that the administration decided that just too many problems occurred and that they decided that we needed to abandon this project. And so we're going to have a discussion in this committee about that at a future time. It might need to be an executive session because of potential legal issues. But I just want to put that on everybody's radar screen. And so we're going to next proceed to Zig Berzen's exit briefing and final report to us regarding the ERP system. And before Zig begins his presentation, I would just like to say publicly to thank you very much for the service that you provided to Cuyahoga County, and that you provided significant service at a very high quality level, and that you made a difference. We didn't accomplish everything that we might have wanted to in this project, but we accomplished some important things and have a project that enables us to move forward with our systems. And I don't think we would have come out of it as well as we did without your assistance. So I just want to express my appreciation.
If I may also.
Yes.
Certainly had my share of questions over the last, I don't know how many months that you've been with us. And not only were we able to advance, but you were there to make sure that we understood the good and the bad, and have a very good understanding of where we were on an inside baseball kind of way of making sure that we could make good decisions based on the facts. So thank you for your service, and it was invaluable in my opinion.
Thank you so much for your comments. It has been a pleasure to be of service, and it's been a wonderful, challenging experience over the last 4.5 years. Okay. So this is the exit briefing. I have been here for 4.5 years. You'll see I'm one of the few people that has continuity along with yourself to this entire project. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a summary of the engagement and repeat for you some of the things that were indicated by the project team in 2017 as promises that the system would deliver. And then we want to talk to you about the customer reactions. In other words, I interviewed the executives from all the various departments and agencies to get their reaction to what the expectations were and what these promises were and what they still see and needs to happen. And then the service provider themselves, in other words, IT, and in terms of providing services and what they think happened and what they think needs to take place. I'll talk to you a little bit about our conclusions. And then just kind of give you some warning of some of the things that you should be looking out for over the next few months. And then lastly, I want to at least summarize for you the takeaways from this conversation. So the engagement started 4.5 years ago. The project had already started. It was 2 years in. And if you'll recall, it was a $21 million budget. And the team had already figured out that they needed to spend the additional $4 million, which is why for many years everybody kept referring to this as a $25 million budget, but that's not the case. It was really 21. Zico started in January of 2018. There were two parts to our engagement. The first one was to do an assessment of the project and develop a report of observations, conclusions, and findings. And the second part of the engagement was to provide continuing observations on a monthly basis regarding this project, That was originally thought, of course, to last only a year or two, and it has been extended because the project got extended. So the initial assessment came out in January 2015. We talked basically, about change management, the project plan. There was a survey of all the people on the team as well as the users, and that was summarized and presented as well. And then continuing project oversight was a matter of staying in touch with the various leaders of the project team on a weekly and monthly basis to look at the weekly reports, to look at the monthly reports, to look at the project cost reports. You'll notice that I have on there when available. There were times when the project weekly reports didn't get published. There were times when the monthly reports didn't get published. They were late, and there were times when the project costing was late as well. So this is a reminder of the continuity. I mean, I've got some memories of this project that very few people have. And meanwhile, as I indicate on this page, there is a significant amount of turnover in the leadership of the project, not only on the IT side and the project side, but also on some of the key departments, which included finance and HR. And there's some big numbers up there. We're talking about several different CIOs and several different HR directors and so forth. So in the beginning, in 2017, the project team said that the new system is going to be transformative. It's going to change things for everybody. So that was a very key promise that they made, that they said that they thought the system would provide to the county. They talked about HR operations, they talked about finance operations, because that was their focus, okay? And public works, and you'll recall the very first successful rollout was for public works, and it was the work order system. There were some promises also from a visionary perspective in 2017 that went beyond those particular departments. They talked in terms of, there'll be general efficiencies achieved, that employees would see the benefits of the system. So there were some relatively grandiose types of visionary statements made. And these are taken directly off of a project briefing by the project team to this committee back in 2017. So the solution that was proposed at the time was that there would be an enterprise-wide solution. Okay, the operative word there is enterprise-wide, or phrase, that it would be a fully integrated solution, that everything would fit together. Everything would fit together electronically. And that there would be a single vendor, one contract, one vendor, so you know who to talk to. That was in 2017. Now, 5 years later, 2022, all right, is it an enterprise-wide solution? The answer is no, it's not. Quite a few of the non-executive agencies were excluded, with the exception of time reporting and payroll. Okay, so it's not an enterprise-wide solution. There's work to be done to roll it out to the non-executive agencies. It was supposed to be a fully integrated solution. That's not the case. There are a tremendous number of examples of pieces of this system that simply electronically do not connect. Interfaces have to be developed and have been developed. They need to be then processed and then uploaded into another module. This is especially true between work orders and purchasing, work orders and payables. This is especially true between budget formulation and the general ledger, and so forth. I mean, so quite a few of these things just simply are not electronically connected. Single vendor. Started out with Infor. You have a 10-year contract with Infor. You got 4 years left, by the way. Just 4. And you also have now not one vendor, but you have 3 vendors. Infor with the bulk of the solution, but they sold off the work order piece. The enterprise asset management has been sold off to Hexagon. And the budget preparation module from 3 years ago failed. Info went out and got another vendor and another product, which, by the way, is not integrated with the system, nor does it use the same report writer, nor does it use the same technology. So as I mentioned to you, I set up interviews with the leaders throughout the county. They were all wonderful and gave me almost an hour of their time. It's much appreciated. And what I'm going to present to you now is basically a paraphrasing of the things that I learned from those interviews. So let's talk first of all about the customers. I mean, the customers are the users of the system, such as the finance department, such as HR and so forth. It's not IT. So the question that I was asking them is, okay, they said that they would transform your operation. How have they transformed your operation? Well, there's some good news here. There's some good news here. You know, Public Works has been transformed because they went from manual work orders to automated work orders. Okay. The open enrollment process is a different open enrollment process. It has been transformed from what used to be there. So that has done something to HR. Timekeeping, supervisors are very involved now with the review and approval of time cards or time reports. That was not there before. Okay, the 3 document match is being enforced by the system. That's the receiver, the purchase order, and the invoice. And you do have some systems that didn't connect at all. They didn't even have interfaces, which now do at least have that in terms of the replacement system that came from Infor. So it's been somewhat transformative. Is it perfect? Is it 100%? No. But it is to some extent as listed. So I asked, well, has it been beneficial? And generally, there were some responses that said, okay, if you look at the workforce that the county had in 2016 and the workforce today, you actually have fewer employees, yet you're still getting the same work done. So there's some indication there on a very high level basis that you are getting more the same amount of work out with fewer employees. This system will allow the organization to sunset or retire the large mainframe, the old technology. And that's targeted for the end of this calendar year. We mentioned the automated work orders. I mean, as soon as you have those, plus you've also automated contracts, which was not automated before. So you have 2 areas that now have improved controls, improved accuracy, merely by the fact that they're now automated instead of being manually done. We talked about the adequacy of training. And there was a positive aspect, and that is that one of the modules that the county purchased from Infor was called Learning Management. It allowed the organization to schedule training classes and to have videos and have PowerPoints for the classwork themselves, and they could schedule people into the classes. And so the county used this product right after probably the 2nd year. They were able to finish getting that loaded in, and they've been using it ever since. That's a good thing. And because of that, it really helped during COVID, because everybody was able to do some of the training classes with Zoom or videos and that sort of thing, which was at least the fact that you were able to do that and you didn't have to stop the project. However, there apparently has been very little focus on orientation training or refresher training. I mean, it's one thing to say, gee, we trained people 4 years ago or 5 years ago, but the question is, what are you doing for any new employees that come on board, or what are you doing to refresh people who have used the system very infrequently and could use some little refresher to help them use the system better? So that's not been the case. So what are some of the lessons learned out of all of this? And again, remember, I'm asking the executives of the various using departments this question. They immediately recognized that the steering committee was not fully representative. So broader representation, and this is coming especially from the non-executive agencies. No surprise there. One single project director. We've been down this road quite a bit, and the fact that early on where the project was basically being managed by committee. That finally got straightened out, although there's been turnover. Early on, the project team recognized that in order to get people working on this project from the various departments, we had to backfill their positions. And there's quite a bit of conversation when I first got here about that backfill and the budget and whether or not we were getting those people lined up. We spent a lot of money for contractors to help support backfill, but there was not a lot of that backfill effectively being done to the point where users we didn't have to worry about putting in extra time. There was a lot of overtime. People got burned out, and that kind of thing was happening. So that needs to be better managed in the future. I mentioned up there that there needs to be a more consistent, more disciplinary approach to best practices from a project management perspective. Very simple things like get a timely weekly report out, for Pete's sakes. Why should it be 3 weeks late? And how meaningful is that? Using a detailed project plan and updating it on a weekly basis. I mean, those things just simply did not effectively happen all the time. There were spurts. There's been a question about ownership of the project from the very beginning. There's no question that many of the using departments, the customers, if you will, thought that the project should be run by the customers. Instead, there was a tendency to assume this was a technology project. Therefore, whoever runs this thing ought to be a DOIT person. And I think generally almost everybody agreed that it really ought to be a non-technical person, but a good project manager. Okay? Lastly, I mean, everybody, what we talked to, was very pleased and supportive of the fact that work orders got implemented reasonably well and on schedule. Same thing at the very back end, time reporting. But the main reason for that is it got broken down into pieces. So it was rolled out in pieces, and that worked. So they thought that made sense, and that's certainly something that should be remembered going forward with regard to other projects. I'm not going to go through this detailed list, but there's 2 pages of this. There's 16 of them up there. And when I said, well, what is it that you think still needs to be done? What still needs to be done? Well, this is the list. There's 16 of them. And the thing I think we need to recognize is that none of these are 8-hour tasks. They're all significant. They're all, some of them could be as much as several $1 million in budget. So that means that there's quite a bit of improvements and enhancements that the customers of the system want to see. Not the technical folks, the customers of the system. Like, for instance, Enterprise Asset Management has an inventory control module. There's been some work on that, but that's nowhere near complete. Okay? And we've all heard about expense management as being something that you purchased in 2016. Nothing's been done with that. Okay? Oh, I want to highlight the last item on here. A lot of people were unaware that BODD has actually purchased their own accounting system. That was discussed years ago and said, why don't we include them in the scope of the project? And instead, they ended up doing their own. But it's not connected. So now the question becomes, well, shouldn't that Oracle, which is what they decided on, be connected to accounts payable? Because the checks come from Infor. So there's the 2 pages of that. The group of leaders that are customers all agreed that it made sense that IT needs to be overseen by a steering committee of some sort. So that one, these players can have input into the process, and secondly, that somebody is making priority decisions for DOIT. So then, let's look at it from a service provider perspective, and I think we need to all recognize that DOIT, the Department of Information Technology, is a service provider to the rest of the county. That's their job. That's what they do. They do not decide how to pay a check or how to pay an employee. They don't do that. They don't own the data. They're a service provider. So from their perspective, was there a transformation from a technical perspective? And the answer is yes, there was. Okay? So the entire solution from Infor is basically on the same platform, meaning that it's out in the cloud, software as a service. Except, I mentioned to you earlier, that the budget formulation management solution from Sherpa, which is the second vendor that you're faced with, that's an on-premise solution. It's not in the cloud. Okay? Nor is it electronically connected to Infor. So the Office of Budget and Management has to go through some gyrations to get the data passed back and forth. Over 50% of the solution is multi-tenant, which means the multiple organizations can be accessing the data at one time, which is a very efficient way to design a cloud-based system. So the technology folks are very happy with that. But there's an exception. And interestingly enough, it's literally for half the solution. Half the solution. Half of Infor is Lawson. It's what they purchased Lawson. I don't know exactly how long ago, but it might have been 15 years. But it's a different technology. It's not multi-tenant. Okay? But the technical folks are very happy with the whole idea of it being in the cloud because that's much easier to update. And that, from a technical perspective, it's also nice that being in the cloud means a mobile app is available if it gets installed. I mean, so I know they're testing that right now so that people can do things with their phone directly with the system, like reporting time.
So, brief interruption to note for the record that the council president has joined the meeting. Thank you.
That gives me a chance to get a drink of water. Okay. So what are the perceived benefits from the service provider perspective? And they're very pleased, of course, and they take all kinds of credit for the fact that, work orders have been automated. They were manual before. Same thing with contracts. Those have been automated, and that's a good thing. And the IT department is looking forward to getting rid of the mainframe. Right? They also take a technical view that with all of the various intertwining systems and the fact that it's a fully interfaced solution, I won't call it integrated, you've got more granular data now available to the users, which is a good thing. All right? They just have to learn how to access the data. And they recognize that the whole system is being conducted with less staff from 2016. So what about the life of this system? You know, and again, this is a conversation that we had with DOIT. And this is a reminder to everybody that you are in the 6th year of a 10-year contract with Infor. That means that you've taken all this time to get to where you are. You now have 4 years left. And then you're going to get into a conversation about what do we do from that point onward. And quite frankly, you probably need to do that easily 2 years before the end of that contract. And you may rest assured that your vendor is going to want another 10-year contract. I mean, that's the nature of the beast. But don't forget, there's more than one vendor involved now. Okay? More than one vendor. Now you're talking, all 3 of those vendors are controlled by this contract. So you're okay until, what's the date? 2026, excuse me. That's the official end of the contract. So you're okay until then. But you then have 3 vendors, and you got to decide what you're going to do about EAM with Hexagon and what you're going to do about Sherpa. Okay? And given the track record, it takes time to make those kinds of negotiations and decisions. Last item I've listed up there for folks who are not familiar with the concept of software as a service, in essence, you're renting something out in the cloud. You stop making payments, and in the past, like, for instance, your current financial system, not your current one, your legacy one from 2 years ago. That legacy system was an on-premise system. When you stopped paying for support, you took on the responsibility of maintaining and updating the software, which is exactly what happened because the county thought that that was a way of saving money. Well, you can't save $1.45 million in this particular case, because if you stop paying that, in essence, you lose access to your software. Okay. We mentioned earlier 50% of the system is on a different platform. Technically, and remember, we're still talking to the service provider side of this thing. Technically, you got to realize that if Infor eventually will stop support for the Lawson portion of the system because it's old technology. It's very out of date, okay? So eventually they're going to say, we're going to stop supporting. Now you've got a problem, right? It's also a situation where you are forced to you're interfacing a lot of things with Lawson instead of it being integrated. So they're not using APIs, automated programming interface, not using those kinds of things. The rest of the system is, but not Lawson, because it's older technology. The other thing is the older technology requires you to use a different document management solution, a different report writing solution, okay? I mean, there's even things that you purchased as part of your 1.45 million and the 9 million, the original purchase, things that you purchased that you can't use because you're using Lawson, which includes the enterprise-wide report writer. Can't use it, because it doesn't connect to the major piece of this, which is all your financials. I've mentioned this, and just want to remind you, again, you're faced with contracting with 3 different vendors.
Chairman,
Yes.
I heard everything you said about the N4 and they're not supporting it. Did I miss a recommendation to us or what we should do, or did I miss that? Sounded very doom and gloomish to me.
It's intended that way. The county has to, that's what this thing starts talking about, and there's another slide later that is going to be talking about this as well. The county has to decide what to do about the Lawson's portion of the system, all right? I mean, right now, you've got an implemented system. It's a workable system. Will it last for another 4 years? Probably. Okay, but when you get to the end of that contract, you got to decide, am I going to continue with this? like I just said, probably, Infor is going to say, no, we're not going to support it anymore. You must go to the next version. You've heard this one before, version 11. I mean, that's been kicked down the road for several years now. Okay, you've heard re-implementation. It's significant. I've got more to say about that. But they've got to decide, and they need to, the project team, the PMO office and so forth needs to examine this situation for you and say, well, how big a deal is it? How much is it going to cost? How long is it going to take? Because there is an option, right? I mean, the one option is continue. Then the question becomes continue for how long? That's one option. You're going to hear there are some folks who want to extend the use of the system. They want more people to use the system. Well, to do that, you're going to have to add users. If you're adding users, that 1.45 million is going to go up because the pricing is tied to number of modules, 32, number of users. And if you want other non-executive agencies to have the ability to key in their own accounts payable or their purchase requisitions, that adds a user. They're all over the place. So they've got to come up with a cost-benefit analysis of whether do we want to continue and how do we want to continue with this product. And they probably need to start doing it sooner rather than later because it takes a long time for the county to come up with this stuff. At least it appears that way to me, okay? So that's one option. But the other option, nobody wants to hear this. The other option is replace it. Replace it. Okay, when you start looking at all those 16 items and start saying, well, wait a minute, some of those we're not going to get to for another 2 years because you can't do them all in 2023, which is why you need a steering committee. Okay, can't do them all in 2023. But at the end of 2023, now you've only got 3 years left before the end of the contract. So those are options that need to be examined and they need to be very carefully evaluated. And since they have a significant budget impact, you guys need to be involved, right? And no matter what you do, all of these are more than $10,000. That's your own regulation. That's your own ordinance that says anything over $10,000 for IT is a project, a capital project. I mean, that hasn't. I mean, I've been talking about that one for years. That they don't present a capital project plan. Anything over $10,000 should be. Public Works does it. IT should do it too. So that there's visibility, so that you know, oh, that's capital, we're going to have to figure out how to pay for it. Does that answer your question?
So, a couple of things. It sounds like you're suggesting the formation of a successor to the committee that ran this project, and an ongoing enterprise technology steering committee. Is that correct?
Yes and no. I think there need to be two. There needs to be an enterprise-wide steering committee, which has representatives from all the non-executive agencies as well, so that you can be looking and focusing on this business from an enterprise-wide perspective. But when you have a significant project, then you should have a project steering committee, which would be exactly the same as the one that was there before. Does that help?
It does.
Okay.
And just a comment that following your recommendation, which flowed through this committee and to the administration, we did include a 5-year IT capital plan as part of the last biennial budget that was adopted last November. I'm sure that greater specificity and more detail on that is required, but at least we've made a start on that.
That's great. What I would ask you to do as an organization is to hang on to those 2 pages where those 16 initiatives are, and start finding out when they show up in the capital plan, because almost all of them are capital items, in my opinion.
Yes,
And
that's a good
that's a great
suggestion.
follow-up thing that you could be doing on a quarterly basis, saying, well, where's this? What happened? I've never heard anything about this. You know, because the leadership said they thought it was important.
And so while, while we had a break for questions, I had one more, which is, as you mentioned, the timekeeping where the supervisors are now more involved under the new system, and you mentioned the 3-document match on the procurement. Do you think either or both of those things or other things like that is either saving the county money, preventing mistakes, or creating efficiencies?
I think it's increasing controls. Okay, so it's reducing the risks of error more so than anything else, I think. But it does, in essence, add to the day-to-day activities, which leads people down the path of complaining, oh, we didn't do it that way before, oh, that's a lot more work to do. But it increases controls. And if anything, I mean, this is an organization that should be paying attention to that.
Well, if you talk to our internal auditors, they'll tell you all the time that whenever you don't have controls, mistakes are going to happen.
That would be correct.
So
That would
I'm
be correct.
sure we're getting some benefit out of this.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I may, Chair. Is
Yes,
this
you
the
may.
Couple things. One is interviewing with the users, as you explained. Were one of those our top IT person, Director
Yes, and the service
Johnson?
provider.
Andy John?
Yes.
So when questioned about the several things that still need to happen and the capital project plan, was there a response to that? I mean, should we as council be concerned that that is not on a priority for those that are involved in this? Or is that naturally something that, of course, is going to take place?
Well, I think that, you know, I spoke with Andy soon after he got here, and urged him to put together a capital plan. And it sounds like that's happened. I don't know what's in it. I don't know how detailed it is, but I do believe that he recognizes that the organization needs to develop a capital plan, and that becomes one of their major communication tools with the council.
So at budget time, I guess would be the time to ask that question. When it rolls around at the end of this year. Another question here with the fewer employees that are needed that you made reference to. Do we know if we are still looking for more employees because it's been difficult to attract employees for across the board, and that they are actually in places where we would hire them if they applied, or are we purposely decreasing?
I can't speak to the entire organization. I am aware that HR has struggled with getting resources. And I'm aware that DOIT has struggled with getting resources. But I can't speak to whether or not the sheriff has been struggling with getting resources.
Well, my question though is we see that we have less employees and we're doing the work getting done anyway, but are we still trying to recruit where in a place where it's not needed?
I can't speak for the entire organization. You know, I do know that HR is actively, looking for resources, and I know that IT is, and in fact, I think finance is as well. So all three of those are looking for resources.
Okay, I'm just referencing how beneficial has enabled a smaller workforce to do the same work that was accomplished before staffing reductions and the pandemic. And I'm just asking, is that because we've just been not able to hire more, or is it purposely going to stay small because we were able to not need.
I would be making an assumption. My assumption would be that there will still be a desire to add resources, but just maybe not as many.
Something else.
And we need to recognize that the two major user organizations, the two major customers of the ERP, which is finance and HR, have external contractors as extra pair of hands, as people who know Infor, that you've got to make a decision of, are you going to continue with that, or are you going to replace them? I think you need to replace them. I think you need to have institutional knowledge that's in your employees, not in contractors.
Agree with that, but it's just something else to keep note of. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Proceed.
So one of the other questions that I asked is, if you could do anything in 2023, what one thing would you do in relationship to the ERP solution? And from a technology perspective, the team is, the leadership was very adamant that they really don't like the big bang approach. We need to break the projects into pieces. So WFM was in pieces, if you recall. It rolled out by departments, and work orders rolled out by departments as well. Okay, so they're a big fan, and I agree with it. Okay, so I think up there you can see we said basically take smaller bites, and it doesn't have to be by department. I mean, it can be by function. It can be by geographical location. I mean, there's a variety of ways to break projects down. The ownership of ERP continues to be in flux. DOIT believes that they are the service provider. I think this is important for everyone to recognize, that the leadership of DOIT understands that they're the service provider. And that's what they want. That's what they want to be. They don't want to own the functionality. Okay? They want the departments to own the functionality. They want the departments to own the data and be responsible and accountable for it. But the departments have to be willing to take that on. It's too easy to say IT will take care of it. It's a technical issue. IT will take care of it. Well, incorrect data is not a technical issue. Usually, incorrect data is somebody entered something wrong or transposed two numbers. That's not a technical issue. The fact that you can't log on because you didn't plug in the computer is a technical issue. The fact that you can't log on because your boss doesn't think you should have the rights to do that is a customer issue, not a technical issue. So what enhancements and desires does the technology leadership want to have? They think, and I agree with them, should migrate to version 11 Lawson as quickly as you can. Now, that's going to cost money. No argument. Now, they're looking at it from a technical perspective. And they agree that there should be an enterprise-wide steering committee, and they welcome that committee making priority decisions for DOIT. So what do we have to say? The very first statement yes, sir.
Regarding Lawson version 11, is that available now?
It's been available for at least 5 years.
And is that an Infor product?
Yes, it is. It's an Infor rewrite of Lawson. So they've gone to newer technologies. So it's completely updated.
So if we updated to that, then it would be better integrated with the rest of our system, is
Yes,
that
it would.
correct?
It would mean that you could use Burst, which is their report writer that you can't use today, that you bought. Okay, it would mean that all modules would be using the same document management solution and so forth.
Okay, thank you.
Okay?
May I
So-
ask a follow-up to that? So version 11, how disruptive is that? I mean, we've already got the hardest done. Now we're talking about updating. So what are we looking at?
I've had conversations with Andy about this. I mean, I have a suggestion that would make it less disruptive, okay? Because if you take the same approach that you took before, if you don't learn, if you don't learn from your mistakes, then it'll be disruptive again. I mean, you'll have people throwing their hands up, and they'll all say, "Here we go again." Oh, and then you're going to spend more money than you thought you were going to. All those things are going to happen. So you need to have some way to make it less disruptive. And so what I was suggesting is, does it make any sense to view this as a migration rather than an implementation? Okay? A re-implementation, basically says, okay, let's go through the same traditional things that you went through starting in 2016, 2017. You go through the same stuff. Well, you're gonna run into the same problems. You're gonna run into turnover, you're gonna run into people having to work extra time, you're gonna run into somebody like, I'm not gonna name names here, but there's an individual in the payroll department that has been working ridiculous overtime hours for the last 5 years. Okay, the person is gonna, you say, let's go do it again. So instead of making it and Infor calls it a re-implementation, they say, oh, you got to redesign, we've changed everything. I said, if you can make the statement that we're going to do it a migration, and a migration says take everything exactly the way you have it currently right now in Infor and just simply move it. Now, that's an oversimplification. I get it. But if you do that, you don't have to have as many customer people involved. Instead, you can over-resource with technical people because a migration is a technical activity. Move this data from A to B, move this logic from A to B, okay? And he was considering that, okay? He was considering that, but that's certainly what I think you need to seriously consider, and why it makes sense to go ahead and do it in 2023. But if you do, that means your steering committee's got to buy into it, and you as an organization needs to buy into it because it will cost money. Now, will it be $30 million or $35 million? No. But if you recall the conversation about version 11 2 years ago, we talked in terms of a range of 2 to 5 million. Well, a migration puts you in the way at the low end of that, not at the high end. Okay? Am I answering your question?
Yes, I think so. I mean, so you're saying to use tech people, not our own people.
If you keep everything exactly the same, as soon as you start saying, well, as soon as people say, well, I want to change the way we do this, I want to change as soon as you get into that aspect of it, you're getting into design work, and then you're getting into re-implementation, and you're starting to make all kinds of changes. The one hooker in here is how many changes you have to make to the software to support cash accounting. You remember that conversation. That cost the project a year as opposed to accrual accounting, because, and I don't know if the new version 11 has cash accounting already in there. If it does, then it's easy. If it doesn't, then you got to make some changes to version 11.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay. So I state this as a bottom line, but it's the very first bullet. Overall, I believe you have a workable solution. Okay, so you do have a workable solution. the loss of components of the system are a step behind. No question, I think you should move off of that. And I just am trying to remind everybody, after 6 years, there's a long list of lessons learned. For Pete's sakes, don't repeat mistakes. If somebody says, gee, IT, we need an IT project director, or gee, we need to have 3 project managers. No, we want 1. Gee, we don't need a steering committee. All it does is, cost us time. Yeah, you do. Okay? Gee, we don't like weekly reports. It takes so much time for us to do weekly reports. It's a best practice. That's how you stay on top of things. Do you remember several years ago when we talked about maintaining pace? The way you get to the end is you maintain pace. One step after the other, the steps are identical, which means every week you put out a weekly report. And you don't put out a 50-page weekly report, you put out a 3-page weekly report. If you recall how long some of those weekly reports were. I've listed here what I refer to as drips and drabs. I mean, the project's been called done. There's still a lot of things hanging out. These are the smaller items, okay? The one at the very top, I want to just remind everybody about this one, and I've discussed this with the team. You need to have as-built documentation, okay? Now, there's some concern about whether or not you have as-built documentation. I'm just suggesting that the team had better take a look and make sure that with the documentation that exists regarding how the system is configured needs to be as-built. It's what exists today, not what somebody designed in 2016. I guarantee you things have changed since 2016. Hiring the rest of the in-house ERP team, we talked about that. I mean, you've got to decide, are we going to keep our institutional knowledge ourselves, or are we going to keep putting it in the contractors' hands? Enable user ownership. One of the ways that you enable user ownership is that you let the users decide who gets access to the system. That doesn't have to be an IT function. It should be the user function. They're the ones that know who should be entering the data, who should view the data, who should look at it, and they ought to have the technical capability to go in there and make that change. That helps establish the ownership, accountability, and the responsibility for the data. So this is a reminder that there were 16 initiatives that the user community identified, okay? This is something that everybody needs to be looking at and needs to be remembering and needs to bring up and say, what about? And they're not ones that I have created. But we also have to remember, very few of these are going to be accomplishable in 2023. So immediately you get into the priorities game. There's a tendency in the public sector, when you start talking about priority, to make your decisions based on dollars. No surprise there. All we're suggesting is that steering committee should have a predefined prioritization schema that goes beyond just dollars. I mean, there are other reasons to do something, and you need to decide when that comes into play and when that overcomes, this is the least expensive way to go. And that includes things like regulatory mandates. You remember we had to make some changes because of COVID and the pandemic? That was a regulatory mandate. cost avoidance, especially to avoid lawsuits. People tend not to remember cost avoidance. If you start messing with people's times and then unions get involved, you're always faced with that. This is a list of some additional things that we're suggesting that should be added to that list of initiatives from the users. We need to operationalize the project management office. They're the ones that should be making all these estimates and figure out what it's going to take to do. That's what their job is. Because projects, capital projects, report to the PMO office. Excuse me, I wanted to at least highlight this one down here. The third bullet, develop work rule update calendar. You have 32 union contracts, right? I think it's safe to say that virtually every time you renegotiate a union contract, you more than likely will have at least one, if not two, at a minimum, work rule changes. Okay? Remember when we had conversations about 2 years ago, the number of work rules? Like 2,000? Some number like that. So every union contract, when it comes up, there'll be a change. Well, you need to have a calendar. The IT team, the support team needs to have a calendar to say, oh, here are the 32 contracts. Here's when the contract expires. Here's when the negotiation starts. Here's when I'm going to get told what those work rule changes are. And here's what I know I have to tell my staff that they've got to do to make those changes. Because WFM, the time reporting mechanism for 5,000 of your 7,000 employees, has to reflect that work rule change. If the pay rate for some kind of special work goes from 1.5 to 1 3/4 time, that's got to go into WFM. So that when it passes the data to payroll, you will pay correctly. To my knowledge, that doesn't exist. And worse yet, as soon as you've made that change in WFM, if it doesn't occur before the contract date, then you've got to make it retroactive. And now you go back and recalculate people's pay. Could be as much as 6 months in arrears, right? Could be. So the team needs to know that, needs to be prepared. Otherwise, you get surprised, you do a knee-jerk reaction, and then when that happens, you have to go back and retroactively longer than you need to.
So, getting back to bullet point 1 for a minute, are you recommending a permanent project management office as opposed to just having it set up when there's a capital project underway?
Yes, absolutely. And I believe that's exactly what the team is trying to do. In other words, there is an individual now whose official title is to be the PMO manager, director, I don't know which.
Okay.
And the multiple project managers report to the PMO. Okay? So that's there, but again, operationalize, make something happen instead of talking about it,
Okay.
Okay? I talked earlier about user ownership. Establish user system administrators. The using departments, the customer departments need to have their own administrator with access to the system so that they can do administrative duties on who gets in, who doesn't get in, who gets to do this, who doesn't. What can they do? What can they see? They need to have that in their hands instead of making a phone call to IT. Now, I would tell you that there is a backlog, which is good. I'm a big believer in an IT department having a backlog, which is a listing of things to do. Now, these are ERP related. I'm sure that they should have a backlog that's even longer than this, and it's going to be for the other systems that they worry about. But this is the ERP backlog. There's 150 items on it. That sounds like a lot, right? Especially since you just finished, right? So the good news is that there are only 24 must-have items out of 150. That's good news. That's not very many. So that's something that's achievable. They can work on it. I do find it interesting that they have quite a few other categories up there, which is nice to have, could have, should have, and then there are 7 of them that says you won't have. You're never going to get that. I thought it's interesting that that's even there. But
Yes.
Should haves, how extensive are they? The should haves, how many are there? And qualify the should haves for me.
I don't remember the number, to tell you the truth. I have the list. I can send you an email and tell you what the number is, but I don't remember. It was, it was not, it was, the only thing I remember from looking at the list is that it was fairly evenly balanced between should haves and nice to haves and, could haves. But I don't have the number. But I'll send it to you. The largest group of items across the board was accounts payable. I think that's an interesting highlight. Okay? And then that was followed by procurement, human resources, and general ledger. So these are the major components. WFM, interestingly enough, not very many. Work orders, I don't know if there was anything for work orders. Okay. But the other thing I think we need to know is the backlog did not include any of those 16 items that we talked about earlier, which are capital project oriented items. So either the team is not treating the backlog to include all capital items, or they've decided the capital items are going to be treated in a listing with the PMO, the project management office. I don't know. Okay, regarding version 11, product is ready. We've talked about this. We talked about migrating rather than re-implementing. So that's just a recap. I do think that contractually, given the experiences you've been through, you certainly can sole source Infor if you wanted to. You don't have to necessarily put that thing out for an extensive RFP. We talked about operationalize the PMO. One of the things that I think you should consider and make sure that it occurs is that they need to be visible. They need to be visible. They're not visible right now. You don't know what they're doing. Okay, it seems to me like if you list all the capital projects, you could put them out on a website, for the county and say, oh, here are the capital projects we're working on. And the last line there is, remember the wish lists. These are the 16 items on page 22 and 23, which I urge you to hang on to. We've talked about this enterprise steering committee. I think it's important. You have an election coming up. And if you're going to get anything done that's significant in size from a technology perspective, from an ERP perspective, you probably need to get going on it, which means that you probably need to give yourself a full year, for instance, to do version 11, which means that you probably got to decide in January. So you start backing up from there, saying, oh, if there's going to be a steering committee meeting in January, I have to have it formulated. And for me to have it formulated, I got to have a charter for this thing. And I probably need to get this to the transition team so that they can take it all into consideration so that you know who's going to become a member of the steering committee, because you're going to have some changes. No surprise there. But all I'm suggesting is this, that certainly a charter can be developed in the coming month or 6 weeks. That's easy. And then when you have that charter, you can pass that on to the transition team and say, oh, by the way, you know, we're talking about all these capital projects. We're talking about this kind of money we're being involved. It's not something that's inconsequential. It's not a small deal. You know, we're talking about millions. Maybe the transition team will then take that into consideration and say, oh, okay, fine. You know, here are the people that ought to be there. So I realize there are other things that are spending a lot more money. And there are a lot of political things, I'm sure. And I've listed what the charter should have in it. Okay? As opposed to the enterprise-wide steering committee, I'm suggesting for the significant projects, you need to have a project steering committee so that you've got the key players involved overseeing the project. It's a capital project. So, and this is bound to be, if you look at the enterprise steering committee, it needs to be the leader of the department. I mean, we're talking about executives. For the project steering committee, it needs to be the next two tiers of management. Does that make sense? Because they're more involved with what goes on day to day. So that's what I mean by continue the use of project steering committees. Okay, what should you be looking out for? Here's the list of some things that I think that the council should be looking out for. You should be looking out for Infor consultants. I mean, are they still around? They shouldn't be. You have quite a few contractors that are here because they provide Infor expertise. They are extra pair of hands, not only in the IT department, but also in HR and finance. You need to be on the lookout for, hey, when are they going to go away? You've told me that there is a capital projects plan. That's great. Need to be paying attention to what budget adjustments IT is going to be requesting for 2023. But once and for all, we need to finish the Sherpa project. That thing keeps sitting out there and it's not done yet. That was originally part of what everybody said is done. And you need to have IT starting to work on what are we going to do about cost benefit of version 11. So the approach and the way of doing it and all those kinds of things need to take place within the next month or two. So what are your takeaways? I'll remind you again, you have a workable solution. It works. Is it perfect? No. Now, is it only 80% of what you bought? Yes. But that's why there is those 16 items on what I'm referring to as a wish list from the users. You are not done. There's work to be done with the ERP. In fact, it'll probably go on for several years. Just recognize that that's the case. You're not done. You can't sit back and say, oh, this is what we're going to have for the next 15 years. I would suggest to you that several years from now, what you have will not look like what you have today. Because ERP solutions and the technology of the world today is an evolving approach to systems, not a one and done.
To the idea of evolving, when it comes to the dollar amount associated with that, do you see an incremental, I don't know if that's the right word, dollar amount, or are we talking some massive expense like we've done? Or
The only time you're going to be looking at, as you put it, a massive number is if you replace. If you replace vendors, if you were to say, gee, we really are not happy with what we've got, you use it until the contract runs out and you say, let's replace it. So if you do that, then you got to start 2 years before then, because you got to do an RFP and do a design work and all. And you got to get a budget of, X amount of money, which is definitely going to be 7 digits, right? It's going to be 5 million, 10 million, 15 million. Depends on what you end up selecting, okay? I've got I've got gut reactions to what you ought to be selecting, but I don't want to second guess what you've got. But there are products out there that are not as expensive as Infor, that are all inclusive. There are, okay? But you still would be spending, even at the low end, 10 million. So that's to be the larger number. Meanwhile, if you're going to hang on to it for another X years, 10 years, whatever the case may be, then you probably are going to want to set up an ERP annual budget. So 2 to 3 million every year. That's the evolutionary piece. Okay? Because if you look at those 16 that we have listed there, version 11 is about all you can handle in 2023. So that leaves you with 15 that are still sitting there. Compensation management, expense management. I mean, there's a nice long list there. They're all functional. They're functions that you're basically adding to the software. That's the evolutionary piece. So you have to set aside, well, then maybe in 2024, you'll have 2 or 3 or 4 of these initiatives that you can get done in 2024, and that would eat up $2 million. So you're into every year having some kind of number that I'm sure Andy can define for you, that you would set aside and say, hey, we recognize that ERP is evolutionary. Let's take care of it and let's put him a number out there, which is going to be, and he's going to sit there and tell you, well, I need to have X number of people on staff, and then so the salaries will be associated with that. And then you get into direct costing and say, okay, I'm going to pull them off and put them on this project. That drives the cost.
Are there recommendations in here that this body should be bringing to our IT director, Andy, or have the two of you already had these conversations? You have a sense that,
well, in passing, yes, we have. But I have already indicated that one of the things on here is that they need to give you a cost-benefit analysis, step 1, for version 11, because I think that's the one you need to do you need to do that in 2023, so you gain some value from it. If you don't, you just put it off, then you're not going to gain any value from it, because again, you're faced with, you've only got 4 years of that contract left. If you put it off 2 years, you're only going to get 2 years use, and then you're sitting there going, because Infor will be very happy if you basically let this thing sit, and then what's going to happen is you're going to arrive at 12/15/2026. You're going to arrive at that date, and they're going to say, hey, by the way, you got to pay up, and we need to sign up for this contract. And if you're not ready, and if you haven't done your homework, you're going to be forced into signing something. And then you're going to get into, well, maybe we'll do it month to month or something like that. And of course, that will significantly increase the cost. Then they've got you over a barrel. Am I helping you? Okay. Okay, so you're not done yet. Takeaway number 3, please avoid repeating mistakes. There are pitfalls out there that the team they have stepped into those potholes for 6 years. And, I already said that you probably need to have a performance audit and look back and get all the lessons learned in detail so you can avoid them. But you need to make sure that happens. And the easiest way to do that is when somebody says, well, we want to do this, you say, well, what did you do 6 years ago? If it's the same thing, you better tell you why you want to do the same thing. Why do you want to have 2 project managers? We only need 1. Where's the steering committee? Those kinds of things. Avoid more than 1 project leader. I love this photo. We've talked about that. That's a takeaway. You got to be prepared for any time you have somebody coming to you with a let's manage this by committee. I think you would shoot them down. Take baby steps. It doesn't mean go slow. It means take small chunks. Take small chunks. And everybody who comes to you with a plan should be able to show you that they're doing it in small chunks. okay? Again, work orders was that way and WFM was that way, and they both met their schedule. Nothing else did. Nothing else did. The agile approach. Try things out. We were talking, we were talking about, well, if you were to consider a replacement, what would you want to do? Well, I'd want to pilot the darn thing. I'd want to see, I'd want, if somebody tells me this is a fully integrated solution, I'd say, show me. Let's do it. Let's do a pilot. Show me how all this fits together. All right? So the agile approach, as opposed to what they refer to as waterfall, means that you do design pieces. You take little design pieces, which in essence means that you are piloting a function. You're piloting a function. You're trying it. And the technology supports being able to do that today because most of the products are in the cloud, which means that everybody can have access to it. Does that make sense? So, have people talk to you about, is this agile? Is this a piloting approach? Are we taking pieces here? Don't just give me some big number and say it'll all be done in a year, because everybody, lessons learned. That's not what happened. That is not what happened. Team continuity. It's unfortunate when a project takes as long as this one did. There's a lot more time for people to get burned out. If you take small chunks and you take functions at a time, then when you're piloting things, then people don't have to spend 6 years on the same thing. They spend 6 months or 3 months, then they're done. You go on to another function and you get different players. You're able to maintain, and the continuity is in the leadership. The leadership got burned out, no question. When you saw that list, leadership got burned out. Not only the people that are doing the work, but the leadership got burned out. Capital project visibility. Can't say this strongly enough. Those 16 items need to be a project, a capital project. Need to have a project steering committee, need to have a project director. They need to report to the council because they're spending money. And it's sizable money. And again, I'm saying 2 million is sizable, but remember, the county's ordinance regarding the definition of capital projects for IT is $10,000. I looked that up 4 years ago. Now, maybe it's been changed, but I doubt it. They should be visible. And the way they're, as soon as you make them a capital project, then they've got to report to the council because they're spending money. How you doing on that thing? Every quarter, tell me how you're doing on that thing. I just want to show you, there is a list of all the acronyms on the last page. Any other questions? I made it.
Yes, so
I do have a
it
question.
sounds to me like good planning and sustained effort over time are the keys to not getting ourselves into a position where we're going to be taken advantage of by the vendors.
May I, Chair?
Yes.
So I've got one big question. So I think right now we have the best team that we've had in our IT department. We've got Andy, we've got people that are there that have taken us from a place that was very difficult to a place where we are saying that we are at a place of completion, except for the 20% you talked about. But we've taken this journey with you over the last 4.5 years and understanding where we needed to be. Now that we're at this place and you're giving us all these heads up of all these different things that we need to be looking out for, who is responsible? Who would be the person that has the institutional knowledge that you have, that knows this whole thing? Not just, I know my thing, I know HR, I know payroll, I know finance, look out for all these. Who is the one, would that be Andy Johnson who would be making sure that all these things are being done? I mean, we can't possibly know all the interactions of what's going on in each of these departments that we have to look out for. How, mechanically, logistically, what is the person that is looking out for all this? Is that the PMO that you mentioned here earlier?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. The person who is responsible for the project management office, and that person exists, is the person who would have all of the initiatives come to them. So they would have them all. That person would be the person that would be talking with the executive steering committee, the enterprise-wide executive steering committee, and basically be presenting, hey, by the way, I've got, these following initiatives, here's the progress on those, and here's which ones are rated as being most important, they have to be done right away, here's the ones that don't. And then somebody like the sheriff says, well, wait a minute, we need to have this for the following reason, because the state says, well, whatever. I mean, that's how that should probably work. So no, I don't think it falls in the CIO's bailiwick. He's got too many other pots that he's got to stir and all that. So I definitely, again, I'm speaking at it from the perspective of the ERP solution, which is enterprise-wide and all the various components, because
Right.
and those 16 items on pages 22 and 23 are basically additions to ERP. So I think that's where it all, coalesces, if you will.
So the Operationalize, the project management office, that to me seems probably the most key in what you've presented us today.
Right.
That we need to make sure that there is a project management office that oversees the entire ERP and understands all the pitfalls and all the things that we don't want to do and what we need to do in the future. Someone has to be responsible.
One of the things that would give you comfort, I think,
Yeah,
is if you were to request the charter for the project management office. There should be one. Just like there should be a charter for the executive steering committee, there should be a charter for the PMO. And it should say, this is what the PMO does. And one of the first things that you're probably going to hear if you ask about the PMO, they're going to say, well, we haven't hired all of our project managers yet. Okay, because there's supposed to be, I don't know the number, it's 3 to 5 people whose job title in the IT department is project manager. So they are hired to be generic project managers, not necessarily Infor knowledgeable, but people who are project management knowledgeable, who know how to do a project plan, know how to estimate resources and all that kind of stuff. And those people are actually in the organization called the PMO organization, and they get assigned projects. Hey, you take care of this project. And then when you're finished, you're going to roll off to this one, or you're going to take care of these 2 projects. And meanwhile, every week, I want you to report to me, because I'm the project management office director or manager, I forget the title. And I want you to report to me.
someone has to be overseeing all of
Exactly.
it, right?
Exactly.
And that would be, as you just said, in the project management office.
Correct.
And you say we have someone in place right now and with that,
You have, yes, you do. In fact, you know the person. It was the person who was the project manager on payroll. Connie. At least as I understand, the last time I talked to him about that.
I imagine that's for the next.
That's where I would be looking. But do ask for the charter, because I'm not sure it exists. It's a 2-page document, max.
All right, well, that's where my biggest
Okay.
concern is moving forward is being able to move forward and not being in a place a year from now, reflecting on what we should have done.
Yeah, and the other thing that I would hope, that the county is able to accomplish is to don't let the election slow you down. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of pressure to say, oh, we got to wait. Oh, we got to wait. We have a lot of lame ducks.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. I think you're done.
It's been my honor to serve. I do appreciate having this, be able to work with everybody here.
Okay, take care.
All right, thank you, Zeke.
Safe travels. Number 5, matters referred to committee. Resolution 2022-0316.
Resolution number 2022-0316, amending the 2022-2023 biennial operating budget for 2022 by providing for additional fiscal appropriations from the general fund and other funding sources.
Thank you very much. Who do we have from the administration to speak on behalf?
Good
Director.
afternoon, Councilman Miller, members of County Council. Walter Parfiowitz from the Fiscal Office, Office of Budget Management. I'll just introduce the resolution 2022-0316 on behalf of the medical examiner. And Hugh Shannon is here from the office. He'll discuss the request in detail and answer the questions or whatever questions you may have. So as you can see, the request is for $2,815,521 in additional appropriations, $1,784,021 for personal services, $695,000 for a body transportation contract, $300,000 for medical lab supplies, and $36,500 for computer equipment and upgrades. I just want to be clear, none of these items were included in the medical examiner's budget for 2022 and 2023, and if approved, these items will require additional appropriation.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. And as part of your presentation, I would like if you could try to give us some understanding of what led to such a large miss in the budgeting process that this request is required.
Thank you, Chairman Miller, members of the committee. I'd like to thank the administration as well for their support, and Walter and his team. Dr. Gilson apologizes for him not being here. He is out of town this week, but will be available upon his return if you have any additional questions that you'd like to hear from him specifically. This kind of started when we built the budget, the 22-23 biennial budget. There was an administrative kind of directive regarding vacancies that were on the books at the time when the base budget was being built, in order not to carry over funds unnecessarily until those positions were filled. We complied with that. We did note at the time that those positions were in the process of being filled or had been started to be filled, and throughout that year were consequently filled by the first quarter of 2022. Those, we had a larger than usual percentage of vacancies at the end of 2021 and the very beginning of 2020 and the beginning of 2021. A majority of those were from the forensic laboratory staff, which we'll get into in a little bit when we start going through the positions. these were kind of documented at the time. I put DIs in during the process of building the budget just to be able to document that we had some understanding of what shortfalls we might be facing going forward. We were also at that point, as we were preparing for the budget hearings at the end of 2021 before your committee, in the process of getting ready to negotiate with a newly formed unionized staff in the forensic lab. The CBA did not get completed until May, so that was a kind of a black box for us as far as we knew that the numbers were probably going to go up. We weren't sure how much. We were also in the middle of bidding out the new body transportation contract. That is the largest single contract that the medical examiner's office has. We had already seen increases in costs, a lot of it during COVID, with supply issues, as well as they being able to properly staff their operations at the vendor. So we had some understanding at that point as well that there would be increases to the body transportation contract. Obviously, at the beginning of 2022, inflation, like we all know, had started to hit. Unfortunately, a lot of the materials and supplies and equipment that our office purchases on a regular basis was kind of disproportionately hit by supply chain issues, and higher than even what everybody else was experiencing as far as inflation. I think some of you who sit on the Board of Control remember a discussion about helium gas, and that we were looking at, somewhere on the order of 300% increases on those costs. And obviously we utilize those for the laboratories in toxicology and drug chemistry to a great extent. So we had some understanding that there were going to be increases down the road. There were some things that, however, we couldn't foresee. And you've heard this from Dr. Gilson before. We have some very specialized staffing needs. Obviously, forensic pathologists, there's a national shortage. There are about 500 certified forensic pathologists in the United States. There's over 3,000 counties, 50 states. They all run some form, fashion of death investigation. So that is a serious shortage of qualified staff. The forensic science staff are highly specialized, the supervisors even more so. And again, we were seeing pressures mounting with the coming CBA agreement on keeping the supervisors around as well. And what ended up kind of cumulatively happening within the space of a few months, in May, we completed the CBA. The increases that had been put in place during those negotiations amounted to excess of $500,000 a year of increases in salary just for forensic staff. We were working with the administration to increase the salaries for the forensic pathologists. They were out of market parity with the rest of the country and even within Ohio. As we were completing that process, Franklin County, our neighbors to the south, were facing a crisis. They had lost the majority of their medical staff. They had 2 working physicians at that time. They increased their salaries to an amount that exceeded probably $100,000 more than our most experienced physicians in our office. And we lost 3 of our doctors that went to Franklin County. They're actually, their last days were this week. So we went back to the administration. We asked them to increase the salaries so that, A, we didn't lose any more of our doctors, and to see if we could somehow get them to reconsider. Unfortunately, we could not. But the increases for the forensic pathologists amounted to a significant dollar amount as well, close to, again, $500,000 if it was annualized. And then again, the forensic supervisors, we lost one as the CBA was going into effect. We had an issue with actually salary inversion for a few months over the summer, as the CBA took some of the forensic science staff in excess of the supervisor's salaries. We worked again closely with the administration, with their support, and with Walter's staff and HR, and got those rectified as well. Again, these are all highly specialized, highly qualified folks, and so the dollar amounts added up. And again, we ended up filling the vacancies that we saw in 2020 and beginning of 2021. I had kind of already identified that that was a shortfall, about $600,000 at 10 staff. And that's kind of what's brought us to here. An unfortunate byproduct of all of this, we had gone through, actually, we're now on our 3rd budget officer in the last 12 and a half months. And I, again, want to credit Walter and his staff for kind of holding everything together. But the continuity issue is kind of a difficult one, especially when you're talking about things that aren't just common knowledge about how county government operates. We're very specialized, and it takes a little bit of time to get up to speed, and they've all done a great job, one after the other, in trying to get up to speed about how we operate, what we need to operate.
To Mr. Shannon, how much is the annual budget for the medical examiner's office for 2022 as approved last fall prior to any of this?
So we have 3 budgets, actually. We separate the medical examiner operations from the forensic lab operations. They're both now considered general fund. We also have a statutory coroner's lab fund that the legislature set up. It basically takes in revenues for the autopsies that we do for other counties, and we're able to utilize those funds for equipment for the autopsy suite, things like that. It's been fluctuating. I think we were authorized just excess of $14 million for the year.
And how much of the requests that you're presenting here relates to the just simply filling of vacancies as opposed to the other 4 items or so that you mentioned that were all inflationary in nature?
As I said, for those 10 vacancies, we had estimated it at about $600,000. And we had filled those positions by the first quarter of this year. So we kind of knew that we were already kind of running behind at the beginning of this year. Two other quick notes is that we approached the administration at the end of last year. We had started to run into some problems in the firearms unit with court getting back online after kind of being off for COVID. We were starting to see some serious lags and backlogs in the firearms lab. We put together a plan to fix that. Administration signed off. It accounted for 3 new additional staff in the firearms laboratory. We also went and asked for 2 new doctors at the beginning of 2022, which was approved. We've hired 1. There's still 1 missing, but obviously now the 3 that we're losing in September puts us in the hole. That becomes the top priority. But those are new positions that weren't budgeted for as well, approved at the end of last year and the beginning of this year. There was an appropriation last year for the firearms unit, but at the end of the year, we hadn't been able to hire anybody yet. It was late in the season, so that money got swept up, and we just needed it reappropriated.
And finally, losing 3 doctors unless you fill them very quickly, that's gonna create somewhat of an offset. Have you factored that in at all, or is the money that you're requesting here presuming that the 3 doctors are filled immediately and you have those salary expenses?
I believe that it's been accounted for. Some of those funds are going to be needed because what we've done in the past, we did it during COVID, and we're in the process of doing now is finding locum doctors. They're essentially forensic pathologists with licenses in Ohio who will travel and do a certain amount of autopsies for us to take some of the pressure off of the permanent staff. We're hoping that we're able to do that until we can fill those positions. This year, it's again late in the year and trying to set these things up. These people are usually traveling from out of state. It'll be about $80,000 is the target for this year. Again, that'll be absorbed by, as you said, the salary that we're saving going in with the vacancies now, with the 3 doctors leaving.
Questions by my colleagues? Yes.
So again, with the 3 leaving, do you have a projected time you think it will take you to replace those 3?
Well, Mr. President, that is a good question. That's kind of the $64,000 question.
It's more money than that.
You're right. Because of the nationwide shortage of qualified doctors, it's of great concern to Dr. Gilson and to the office about how quickly we'll be able to turn these around. We do train doctors in our office to become certified forensic pathologists. The best practice is not to hire the people that you actually train because you want them to go out into the world and get new experiences and see how other offices operate. And then at some point they come back around and you can pick them up, and that's great too. But the timing of this particular exodus had been announced just after the 2 physicians that we just trained had found other positions and gone off and done got their certifications and are now employed elsewhere. So it's of great concern. The medical staff, a good chunk of them with Dr. Gilson, will be going to Dallas for the National Medical Examiners Conference. That will be a recruiting trip. As a lot of the new doctors who are being certified are are going to be in attendance there as well. So we're hoping we'll know more at that point in mid to late October if we have any decent prospects.
You don't necessarily want to have to play Monday morning quarterback, so to speak, but I know you made an effort to try to retain those three, and that didn't work. Do you have a better sense of what you would need to offer to even attract? What I don't know if you said it and I missed it, but is there a dollar amount or? I don't know if you need to say it over the air, but
Yeah, that again, there being so few, it's hard to find the incentives for people who are already kind of settled in an office where they are comfortable and they've been and they know how that office flows and operates, and to be able to, get somebody up and out of a situation like that is difficult. Now, Franklin County found a way. They said,
right, 'cause they
here's
were
an
comfortable here with
extra
us.
$100,000. Here's, more flexible, on off hours, which we've toyed with. I think we're in a good place where Dr. Gilson's comfortable, but that's
Know what they were offered at the other where'd they go, Dayton, or where did they
Franklin
go?
County is
Franklin
in
County?
Columbus, yeah.
What were they offered? What was Franklin County offering?
$310,000 annual.
Doctor. Yes.
Right. It's it's sometimes we forget, these are all licensed, certified physicians, and obviously the private sector, they could be making far more money than they are now, and they have all the same student loans, medical school loans to pay off as any other doctor. So that's one of the strategies that we're trying to work with the Coroners Association, and we reached out to the governor's office if there's something that they may be able to put together with some of the medical schools in the state of Ohio. Can they come up with a program that would loan forgiveness with those that go into forensic pathology?
What type of delays are we looking at in getting the autopsies done?
It's going to be heavily dependent on how the caseloads are for the rest of the year. We've been holding even with last year for the most part. Probably stretching our turnaround times maybe 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. We've been trying to get, obviously, with our accreditation, which I will say in the midst of all of this year, the office had been reaccredited by the National Association of Medical Examiners, recertified by the FBI to continue to participate in the CODIS program, which is the National DNA database, as well as our ANABS certification for the forensic laboratories, which now includes the firearms unit. Which
Who do you have to do the autopsy? Not who, but how many, or are there other positions, individuals who are capable of doing the work?
Again, caseloads, we were doing about 1,800 autopsies a year, and another 400 to 500 for outside counties. We had 9 staff. Right. Yeah, we had discussed about doing contract work as well. But so with 9 physicians in the office, we were basically holding just above the accreditation limit of 250 per doctor. That's their first cutoff. You get dinged in your accreditation for going over 250 per doctor. But the real violation is when you hit 325. And that
Right now.
we were afraid we were in danger of hitting without an additional medical staff addition. Losing those 3 doctors even if we hold close to last year's case amounts, we're going to be really close to it. So
325.
We'll be very close to it. Again, it's going to be hard to gauge until we get further into this without these doctors. But that's part of the reason Dr. Gilson's been focusing on trying to get these locum doctors in on a temporary basis to come in maybe for a week and do dozen and a half autopsies, take some of the pressure off the staff.
Thank you.
Mr. Shannon, do you need this legislation passed under suspension, or do you have sufficient appropriation authority available that we can go 3 readings?
We, at the moment, are in a holding pattern. We do not have sufficient appropriations to move forward this month. We've told our staff to kind of just keep an eye out if there are any emergency purchases that we need to make. We'll try our best, but yeah, it would be greatly appreciated if we could suspend the rules.
So,
Just one question.
yes. Go ahead.
Just curious, what was your ask at the budget last year or this year that you were denied? How much are you off? If you were to be given what you thought you should be given, based on what you thought your need was, not knowing about the 3 doctors, which is kind of a wash, except for perhaps the extra pay you're going to put in there, and also you weren't aware of some of the benefits that you had to give in order to keep who you have.
Correct.
But outside of that you couldn't anticipate, what didn't you get in your budget that you thought you should have gotten but didn't ask for because you were only going to continue with what you had?
So the DIs that we put in place for what we did know, the vacancies that we knew we were filling and so on, I believe was about 1.5 million. So the unanticipated portions, the doctors, the new forensic staff that obviously hadn't been put in place would make up the bulk of what we're asking for now.
Right, so if I understand that correctly, the 1.5 million that you did not receive, if you would have received, would have taken care of you're asking for 1.8 million for personnel services. You would have almost been there. Is that fair to say?
It would have been in the ballpark. It would have gotten us further down the road this year, yeah, sure.
How about the personnel services for the extra million? Would you have been short those dollars?
So the forensic staff, that CBA negotiation, again, was a black box. We didn't know where that number was going to come out.
That's extra.
So it was almost $600,000, I think, when it was all said and done, if you annualized it. So that was a big chunk of the personnel costs for the forensic lab.
And if I may ask, will these dollars be taken out of reserves?
Councilwoman Baker, yes, they will be taken out of reserves.
All right, I think that's what we were concerned about in budget cycle, is that, I mean, we do have the reserves, thankfully, but it's not a good practice, I don't think, to underestimate what's needed, only to take it out later.
But Councilwoman Baker, I just want to point out that, this is one of the very few departments that's actually going to be over budget. There's going to be a lot of departments that underspend, so overall, we'll have a surplus.
Good to know, thank you for that.
So, since you mentioned reserves, I would just comment that we need to keep the medical examiner's office running, and we have reserves to take care of things like this. And as you pointed out, there's other departments that are running under budget, and this one's running over budget, and so hopefully that's going to balance out pretty well. So
Can I ask a follow-up to that? Are we running under budget because they can't fill the positions, or is it because they don't need the positions? I mean, there is a difference between the two.
Councilwoman Baker, I believe it's a combination.
So it's not really fair to say that we're making it up because positions weren't filled, because they aren't needed, after all, but because we just couldn't fill them and we would have if we could have.
I'll let everybody choose their interpretation and just say that it appears that we have the money to handle this request. And
Agreed,
so,
Councilman Miller.
so I would like to ask if somebody would like to make a motion to move Resolution 2022-0316 with recommendation for second reading suspension. Is there a second? Any further discussion? It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of favorably referring Resolution 2022-0316 to the full council for second reading suspension, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Is there anybody opposed? Hearing the favorable vote from the committee, it is so recommended. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Resolution 2022-0323.
Resolution number 2022-0323, authorizing an amendment to contract number 1201 with Woolpert Incorporated for the purchase of digital oblique photography mapping in connection with the Ohio statewide imagery program.
Afternoon. Janelle Green, Department of IT here to present this item. The oblique imagery program is something we've had in place since 2018. And this will be an amendment to extend those services. This was procured using the state term contract with Woolpert via pictometry. This will provide high-resolution ortho and oblique imagery of county properties, also provide licenses or access to that data, as well as maintenance and support to access those images that we receive.
And on an annualized basis, how much are we going to be paying going forward comparing to what we're paying now?
It's the same. It's about $192 and change thousand a year. So it's about
So
the
there's
same.
no increase?
No.
Oh, okay, that's good. Any questions by my colleagues?
I do have Tom Fisher here of the IT's GIS department if you had more technical questions as far as what this contract will be providing.
And since the current contract extends through 2022, can we go 3 readings on this item?
Sure, if you so choose, yes.
Actually, for scheduling purposes, the flights would commence in
I'm
October.
so, could you speak into the
I'm
mic?
sorry, Councilwoman Miller. Because of this flight will actually occur in the fall and starts in October, the vendor actually needs to schedule the aircraft to come to Cuyahoga County. So, you know, I guess sooner would be preferred, but I guess it could go a total of 3 readings.
So, the caption reads that the program is currently contracted for 9/1/2018 through 12/31/2022, and then to extend the time period. So are you saying we're not paid up through the end of 2022?
Yes, we actually just completed the contract. They fly in the fall. They complete their flight before the end of the previous year, and then we pay the $192,000 upon completion and delivery of those images. So that's why the contract didn't complete until this year for the last 4-year contract. We're asking to renew that to begin flights again in 2022, pay in 2023.
So they need the contract
Yes, in order
approved
to,
for 2023 so that they can schedule the flights for 2022.
right, it's a 2022 through, I believe is
26.
through 26. So they'll fly here in the fall, and then with a down payment, and then once delivery of services in 2023 of those images, then we'll pay the remaining balance.
So what you're saying is that we really do need it passed under suspension in order to not disrupt the schedule. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. Yes, we do.
Okay. Any further questions? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Been moved and seconded to favorably refer Resolution 2022-0323 for second reading suspension. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. It is so recommended. Resolution 2022-0324.
Resolution number 2022-0324, authorizing a state contract with Woolpert Incorporated in the amount not to exceed $553,305.86 for the purchase of aerial imagery acquisition, ortho imagery processing, and countywide building outlines in connection with the Ohio statewide imagery program.
Janelle Green, Department of IT. This is actually a new contract also with Woolpert to provide these services. This particular project is aerial imagery acquisition and ortho imagery processing. Along with this is time and materials, project management staff in order to aid us in implementing this program at the county.
So you said this is a new contract?
That is correct.
So, did we not need these services in the past, or how did we obtain these services in the past?
I'll defer to Tom Fisher on that.
So the previous contract that we've been doing now for the past 8 years, this would be an extension of the 4-year program. That is the oblique imagery, which is the 45-degree angle images that the fiscal department uses for the appraisal of properties. This imagery that is considered ortho, which is the top-down like you would see normally in Google Maps or Google Earth, this is actually used because of infrequent change of the planimetric or the flat Earth. We use that for planimetric measuring. So what that means is that when the measurements of parcels and properties, ortho imagery is tied to ground control points, so there's accurate spatial measurement on the ground. We're actually able to shore up the parcel measurements and other planimetric measurements from building footprints, essentially. So the last time we had this, we received this data, we believe was in 2017. This would be, it's more of an infrequent product that we would need to shore up that information and provide more accuracy,
So is this being done in addition to the 45-degree angle?
Yes, that's correct.
And with this one, we don't need to do this every year. We just need to do it
That is correct.
occasionally.
Yes, just occasionally because of changes that have occurred over that course of time. We just need to update that imagery, so.
And do we need this one passed under suspension?
No, this one actually will not commence until the spring of 2023, so we have some time on this one.
Any questions by my colleagues?
Just one.
Yes.
Curious
Ms.
that
Baker.
the last request was for 4 years for $700,000. This one is for 1 year for $500,000. It seems like a considerable amount more.
Yes. So the difference with this is the building footprint extraction that's part of the contract. The imagery itself, to fly it, is about 1/3 of the total that you see there, but the feature extraction or the building footprint is very, well, there's some automation involved in that, but there's very staff intensive to actually go through and verify and validate those measurements.
So you can justify that.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
And are there multiple companies that bid on this with the state, or is this the only company that does this?
This is also through state term pricing, so this is a part of that Ohio State imagery program. So we kind of attached ourselves to that program.
Any further questions? No. Do we have a motion for second reading? Is there a
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to refer Resolution 2022-0324 to the full council for second reading. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. The ayes have it, and the resolution is so referred. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Resolution 2022-0325.
Resolution number 2022-0325, authorizing an amendment to contract number 2532 with Infor Public Sector Incorporated for the purchase of 88 Enterprise Asset Management Module Enterprise Edition mobile subscription licenses.
Good afternoon again, Janelle Green, Department of IT. This item is actually an assignment and assumption of licenses for the EAM specific, this is the Enterprise Asset Management Program licenses from Infor Public Sector over to Hexagon EAM Holdings. So essentially Hexagon bought out this portion of our licensing products from Infor. So this not only does the assignment and assumption, but it combines the main EAM licenses, which are carved out from our licenses agreement with Infor, and combines them with the mobile licenses agreement, which was a separate agreement we had entered into with Infor. This also accounts for a true-up that was done in about late October. So we could combine all of these together in order to have one true contract with Hexagon in order to move forward.
And are there any changes in the pricing going forward?
These pricing is actually in the item, it's Exhibit B. They are locked in until December 8th of 2026. So we have, it's a slightly escalating scale every year. There's some percentage, I want to say 3%. Don't quote me on that right now. That escalates annually for this particular program, but that was already baked in the original Infor agreement.
Questions by my colleagues?
I have one.
Yes, please.
Curious on the dates. Licenses for the period 3/1/2018 to 2/29/24 for the assignment and assumption of interest to Hexagon 10/1/2021. You go back to 2021, and then it is not to exceed. So how, explain some of those.
Okay, so the 2018 date was actually when we started getting the mobile licenses. So, you know, when the people are out in the field, you know, mostly public works are out in the field, you know, asset tagging and documenting those items that the county has. That's about the time when that occurred. The buyout of this particular portion of the licenses from Hexagon occurred October 1st. Fortunately, we were
2021.
Of 2021, yes. Unfortunately, we were informed kind of belatedly because they sent that information to a person that's no longer with the county. So once we found out that information, we started working on to combine all of these agreements. So it's kind of combining two different agreements plus adding on some additional licenses that we were using in order to bring this forward.
So the 10/1/2021 really didn't materialize? It
Right,
went
the
from
10
2024 to 2026?
Right, the 10/1/2021 was just the date where there was an official announcement that Hexagon bought out this portion. So the main core of the licenses and also the mobile licenses were already under a contract with Infor all the way until December 8th of 2026. So it's just that transition from Infor over into Hexagon.
And the amount of money for those additional 2 years, is that equal to what we had before? Is that more or less?
It's slightly, well, we had the agreement already till 2026, so it's just a slight increase to account for the true-up of the actual number of licenses that we're using. So in terms of the cost per license, it's in accordance to what we were originally going to get charged from Infor. Again, it's just transferred over to Hexagon.
But you are extending the time. 2024 is when it ends.
No, 2026. It was set to expire October 26th of 2026. And due to how we activated the licenses, it actually made it December 8th of 2026. So we made this agreement to align with the actual, how we implemented the licenses.
Okay. All right, thanks for the explanation.
Thank you.
But the caption says that the original agreement ended on 2/29/2024. Explain what that means as opposed to the end date of October 2026 that you mentioned.
I will have to go back and research that because most of these agreements that that went through, I processed. So in terms of the mobile modules of this, we had aligned it to co-term with the end of the actual main contract, which was October 26th of 2026. So that will require some further digging on my part to get you that information. But all in all, we wanted to transition this out in co-term with the license agreement.
Yeah, it says the same thing in the whereas clause in the legislation too. It says 2/29/2024.
Yeah, and I have the actual agreement up here that only references the December 2026, December 8th of 2026 date. So we can work to correct the legislation, but this again should be out until December 8th of 2026 for this total agreement.
Okay, well, I'm gonna recommend to the council that we move forward on the legislation and that we ask you to determine whether an amendment is needed and if so, to send it over to us so that we can amend the legislation on its final passage.
Absolutely. And also would like to request the waiver of the suspension of the additional readings, as this has supposedly went into effect in October. And we also have true-up invoices that we need to take care of. We would like to move forward as quickly as possible to rectify this issue.
I agree with that. Do we have a motion?
I just wanted, how many invoices are we in the rears for?
It's about 3 different invoices. So we had the core licenses invoice, which again carved it out from the main Infor license, and then we had a couple of invoices that were for the mobile piece, and then we had another invoice for the true up.
That, the dollar amount that you're asking for, how much of that is taken from that amount?
So all of that for 2022 would total $354,964.61.
So you're continuing with 1.1 million. You deduct it from the 1.4?
Yes.
All right, just want to be clear. I'll make that motion.
Second.
Okay, so the motion is to favorably recommend Resolution 2022-020325 with recommendation to leadership to put it on the agenda for passage under second reading suspension.
With the date perhaps changing.
And the department will let us know whether, and if we need an amendment, we'll send it over to us for next Wednesday.
Absolutely.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Resolution is so recommended.
Thank you.
And please let us know about the technical amendment if needed.
Will do.
Thank you very much. Resolution 2022-0326.
Resolution number 2022-0326, authorizing amendments to various contracts with Manatron Incorporated, doing business as Aumentum Technologies for support and maintenance for various Manatron systems.
Good afternoon. Lisa Rocco, Director of Operations for the Fiscal Office. This item is for the 2023 annual maintenance of our current real property tax and value system. The annual maintenance contract for 2023 is a 6% increase from this current year, or $40,000. And the cost of the contract will be paid out of the Real Estate Assessment Fund.
Questions by my colleagues?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Just a quick question. So could you just explain what this is again, for Manatron, what they do?
Sure. This is our current real property tax system. So the Gamma Sigma maintains all values for the 600+ thousand parcels that we have in Cuyahoga County. And then the MVP system maintains the real property tax infrastructure, things as tax rates, that's where the tax billing comes out of, refunds, abatements, special assessments.
Okay, is this the same company that when you call to pay your taxes, they handle that, or is this different?
No.
If you call online, on the phone, or,
Right, they're the infrastructure, you call the Treasurer's Department, and this is the system of record for that.
okay, and has that been corrected for the parcels that had certain, I think if you had letters with the parcel numbers, it wasn't accepting online for people, has that been corrected?
My knowledge, the Treasurer's Department has corrected that.
Okay, okay, because I was gonna say, before I would approve of anything, I would want to make sure that was corrected, because I know that caused a lot of inconvenience for a lot of people.
But
so.
that wasn't due to this system.
Okay, that's kind of what I'm trying to get at, so that's not because of this system?
Correct.
Okay, all right, thank you, I appreciate it, I had to ask, thank you.
And is Manatron owned by the same company that we really recently broke off with on the Harris system, or are these totally different companies?
It's the same company, different business. So they have one umbrella, but they have different businesses under that umbrella.
And do we foresee that situation causing any problem with this contract going forward?
No, not at all.
And if such a problem were to develop, are there other companies that could provide this service, and how hard would it be to switch over to a new company to provide the service? Is it even doable?
It's not doable. We would have to start all over. This is a sole source because they are the ones that have maintained our real property tax system since 2009.
Okay, well, I'm just going to add this to the items that I lose sleep over at night. I could see this being a problem under some circumstances. Any follow-up?
Makes me very nervous, too. And I hear what you say about it's not doable, but putting that aside, is there a 30-day clause to get out?
Yes.
Thank you.
Do we need this under suspension?
No.
No. Is there a motion for second reading?
So moved. Second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded to recommend Resolution 2022-020326 to the full council for second reading at the next meeting. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say no. The ayes have it, and the resolution is recommended. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And under miscellaneous business, I don't have any. Do any of my colleagues have miscellaneous business? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. We are adjourned, and thank you very much for staying with us a little bit over time as was anticipated, but we got the work done. Thanks very much, everybody.